Hey guys, today I'm going to give you an updated review on the RF 50mm. Now this lens is the RF 50mm 1.2L lens. It does use the USM autofocus system, but it isn't the nano type USM like the 70 to 200 f2.8 and the 24 to 105 f4 lenses use. The type of USM system used in this lens, as well as the RF 85mm, is the ring type USM, and that is ideal for moving a lot of heavy glass in a quick and efficient manner. So on the front element, this lens has the air sphere coating to reduce flare and ghosting. This lens is dust and water resistant, so you should feel comfortable taking it out into some pretty nasty weather, and I have definitely done that. The cool thing about this lens is that it has a rounded 10 blade aperture instead of the usual 9 blades. So that does lend itself to having that really smooth out of focus background, as well as a really nice transition into the background and into the foreground relative to the subject. So the minimum focus distance for this lens is, I would say, average. I think that the fastest 50mm lens that had the closest minimum focus distance that I've ever used was the Sigma 50mm 1.4, and I love that lens for close-up photography, but I didn't really like it for portrait work just because of the rendering. But this has a 0.19 times magnification, so it's okay for close-up work, but you're not really going to be getting anywhere close to macro work. But in most situations, it's definitely good enough. For a 50mm lens, it is pretty heavy at just over 2 pounds, but it does pair nice with the Canon R series lenses like the R, the R6, and the R5. If you do want to utilize screw-on filters, this lens utilizes a 77mm filter thread, so it's pretty standard, I would say, and there's a good chance that you might already have something that size laying around. And obviously with the build, with all of the L series lenses in the RF lineup, you're getting that control ring at the top here, which definitely does come in handy. Like I said in my previous video, it's always nice to have an extra layer of control, even if you aren't initially used to utilizing the control ring. The more you do it, the more it kind of becomes ingrained in the brain, and it's nice to have, for sure. You do have a focus limiter right here, so you can get faster, more efficient autofocus if you're working at longer distances, and obviously your autofocus to manual focus switch. So my personal opinion about this lens, I think that it is my favorite RF lens in terms of rendering and character. While this lens is really sharp, it also has a really nice rendering for the out of focus areas, which, sometimes that's a trade-off. Like that Sigma 50mm 1.4 lens I was talking about, I didn't like how abrupt the transition from the subject to the out of focus areas was, and the rendering of the bokeh in that lens was pretty harsh. So in my opinion, the background and the foreground look a lot more pleasing with this lens. And it might have to do with that rounded 10 blade aperture. I think that this lens has just the right amount of vignetting to make portrait work really interesting. Additionally, you're going to be dealing with minimal chromatic aberrations, so that's really not hard to correct in Lightroom if you do see any in your photos. So coming from Nikon, I always get the question of whether I prefer the RF 50mm 1.2 lens or if I prefer the 58mm 1.4G lens for the Nikon system. And honestly, I would have to say that the Nikon 58mm 1.4 lens pulls ahead just a little bit in terms of my favorite standard focal length lens. That lens just had so much character, and even though it wasn't that sharp, wide open at 1.4, I just haven't used a lens like that ever before, and I have yet to find something similar to that. But that being said, I do think that the RF 50mm 1.2 is more of a practical lens, especially if you're doing paid work. Your clients definitely might not be into that really kind of like soft rendering or the soft portraiture look. I would say that the 58mm was more of a personal lens that I like to use for fun, and the RF 50mm is more for professional work. But for the individuals that are coming from Nikon or still have Nikon, I'll put some photos up that I took from each of the lenses, and you guys can take a look at the rendering yourself and see what you think. That's it for today. I'll talk to you guys later.